There
Okay.
we go.
It said it's recording. Perfect. I must have set it to automatically record for the last one, so I didn't even check this one. But thank you. So, hello everyone again. We'll just skip over all of the housekeeping stuff for the recording. But my name is Ella T. Holmes. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the compiler, editor, and illustrator for Artifice Access, the disability in fantasy anthology that you have heard me talk nonstop about. I have short fiction work published, as well as some essays published in a dozen magazines and journals, mostly in the fantasy and speculative spaces. And when I'm not writing, I'm usually doing some disability advocacy work or disability studies research. I am going to go down my list of people here, just to streamline the order of introduction. So, can I please get um, Tam? Can you please introduce yourself first?
So, hi, I'm Tam Ayers. My pronouns are he, him. I am not actually a writer most of the time. I'm a full-time music teacher and hobbyist author, and this is my first time being published. And I'm super excited to be here and to be talking about my writing and to hear what everybody else has to say. And yeah,
Perfect. Thank you. Also, I'm just genuinely so surprised whenever any of the contributors are like, "Oh, I don't usually write like a lot of the time." I'm like, "What do you mean? All of your work is so stunning." Um, okay. Can I get Rascal, please? Can you please say some fun facts about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Rascal. I'm in the southern US. I have one short story published, one coming out, not including this one, and my debut novel is set for end of this year, which is super exciting. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. This was super incredible to like get to meet everyone and talk to everyone and read all these stories. Like it's amazing.
I am incredibly overjoyed to have everyone here as well, and congratulations on your all of your work that is happening. I think that's amazing. Can I get Harper, please, to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, friends. My name is Harper. I use she, her pronouns. I am a part-time educator, part-time writer, and as I call myself, full-time forever DM. I like to write, I like to do TTRPGs, and I'm just also extremely excited and honored and thrilled to be here. This is my first publication, which is why I've been insufferable about it. And I actually have my first full-length novel is coming out next year.
Everyone has so much stuff happening. I feel like I'm not a parent, but I do imagine this is what a proud parent feels like. Sorry, I just need to check my Zoom because everything is like moving around and shifting, and it's really hard to see everyone's names. Do we have? Yes, we do. Ashley, can you please introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Ashley. I also use she, her pronouns. I am the one of the contributing authors in this. My short story is Hope Be It Never So Faint. I am a scientist and author, and I also have a my first full-length novel coming out next year, but and this I've just really this anthology means a lot to me, so I'm very, very honored to be part of it.
I am also, it also means a lot to me. I'm trying to fumble my way through replying to everyone as we do introductions. But okay, who do we have next? I have M. Stevenson. Please take the virtual stage.
Hi, I'm M. or Marina. My short story in the anthology is To Make Her Eat. Sorry, I also use she, her pronouns. Yeah, I am a former outdoor and science educator and currently writing full time, and my debut novel releases in May. It's called Behooved. I'm very excited to be here.
Perfect. Also, congratulations on the book. I've added it to my to read pile on Storygraph, and I'm very excited for that to come out into the world. Okay, so now I think we've introduced everyone. I would really hate to forget anyone, but I just want to make sure. Okay, so last time, sorry, on the stream that we did about 10, 11 hours ago, we sort of ran out of time, but I feel like we're doing really well this time. Introductions took a little bit longer, but I'm going to ask some different questions than I asked in the last stream, just for the sake of like having some different stuff to talk about. So I'm going to ask questions, and then anyone can feel free to jump in. And I know that unmuting and then just answering the question can feel a bit intimidating because it's like, oh, is someone else going to talk? I'm not sure. But don't worry about that. Just feel free to jump in. Or alternatively, I think Natalie in the last stream had a very, very good approach where she kind of raised a hand before unmuting, which kind of indicated to everyone, which I thought was brilliant. So feel free to do that as well. So I'll just jump right in with the first question. And that is, what would you hope that readers take away from your story in the anthology? I also don't know if I should go first as host, but Harper, you can please take
I will
center
go
stage.
first. Um, so my story is the first story in the anthology, One Cream, Five Sugars. And um, the biggest thing that I really wanted for my short story, so my short story is about a girl who is a mercenary, and she works as a mercenary to pay the bills, do the things that she needs to do, take care of her family, which also includes other people with the genetic disorder that she has. It's somewhat similar to my own experiences having Marfan syndrome, growing up with Marfan syndrome. And for me, Marfan syndrome is this disease that you tell doctors, oh, I have Marfan syndrome. And they look at you and they go, what is that? And that was something that was just, it was very traumatizing for me as a 14-year-old. And the biggest thing is I hope that that story reaches someone else with Marfan syndrome. And I hope that someone else is able to feel seen in that. Because I looked, as of right now, there are 4 books in the entire universe that talk about Marfan syndrome. And I just really want to see that count go up. So it's to help other people feel seen, and also to spread awareness and to let people know that this is a thing. So yeah, that's like the biggest thing for me.
I can go. Um, I I think one of the things I want is I kind of want the already with some of the like arc readers, so many people have just talked about even just from like the anthology as a whole, just seeing themselves in fiction and not as a tragedy and not as a villain and not as a sob story or inspiration or anything like that, but just as like normal people experiencing adventure, experiencing romance, experiencing hardship and using and just being characters, just getting to be the main character of a classical fantasy story. And I think for me, the how much that means to people already means a lot to me. And then even for the people who are like able-bodied people reading this, I hope that it helps them understand the way disability and chronic illness permeates everything that you are and do, but that and thinking about people's accessibility and where like energy levels would be really awesome if other people could start thinking about that, but also just seeing us as like normal people, but with like on an extra hard difficulty. And I think just the raising awareness just in general of that chronically ill people are normal people too, and that we deserve to exist in fantasy, I think is the main thing.
For mine, I think I wrote it very much coming from the point of view of someone who recently became chronically ill and disabled, and like all of the emotions that come with that, and trying to find people who understand and finding that community. So I hope someone can read it and not feel alone, but also I hope that someone can read it and understand that you don't have to be able-bodied to be heroic, that heroism can still be accomplished regardless of whether or not you have bulging muscles and a weakness to kryptonite.
Yeah, I think all of the things that everyone's talked about were things that were on my mind when I was writing my story. But I come from like a background in queer theory, and specifically like historical queer theory, where like a lot of the work involves like looking at people in the past and like historical texts and things like that and saying, are like, how do we find queer people in these texts? And I took that mindset when I went on like a deep dive reading a bunch of like Welsh stories and like Welsh mythology. And I was reading the story that my story is inspired by. And there was like this mention of a character who like was like crooked, and like his name meant crooked. And I read that and I was like, what could that be? So that was sort of, there were a lot of other things that inspired this story, but that specifically was where I was coming from with like, how am I going to take that and reinterpret it in a way that inserts disabled people into the past and like takes narratives that don't always include us and like forces them to be about us in a way. But yeah, it's just something that I like to do when I read things from way back when, and it was really fun to get to like reinterpret something just with my own writing.
I think for me, it's pretty similar to, what other people have said, but I guess the biggest thing is, just being seen, because there aren't really that many books that represent a lot of the different things that are in this anthology. And I thought that was really amazing to like just reading through them, all the different like things that you don't normally see on the page, and having that front and center, I think is really meaningful when you're not used to seeing yourself as or like at least like when you're not used to seeing something about you as the front and center thing. Like when I've seen celiac mentioned, it's usually like as like a character trait to show how annoying they are, for instance, because they're like being really picky about their food. So I think, yeah, just showing that and having people like, see themselves on the page is important.
Everyone has such brilliant answers for this question. I was very, very eager to ask it first up. And I think so I didn't really think about it like in terms of my story, because as the like person who was compiling the anthology, I've kind of always been viewing it as like this whole thing, of like many moving parts. And I think like overall there was one reviewer who said it really effectively, I think. And I was like, yes, this is what I want. This is one of the big things I want people to take away from the anthology, is that ableism is one of the biggest problems that disabled people and chronically ill people face, right? So the I think in a lot of disabled narratives, oftentimes disability, chronic illness, allergies, all of these things can be presented to different extents as being not only an individual problem, like for the person it affects, but also just like anything you struggle with or whatever is your responsibility to overcome, or it's your responsibility to heavily advocate for yourself, or it's your responsibility to, ask for accommodations or ask for access and like all of these things. And it just sets up this incredibly unfair dynamic, I think. And so when one of the reviewers said, I think what they said was actually like ableism is the enemy. And I was like, yes, it is. Like the ableist systems that we live under are very much a, horrible oppressive force that we have to contend with sort of every day, especially in a day and age where we are dealing with, an ongoing pandemic, and a lot of us are being told to stay at home basically perpetually, which I think is really, really sad. But yeah, so I think for me personally, the thing that I really wish people would take away from the anthology is that like disability is not this inherently sad, tragic, horrible thing that means we have to live a life of isolation, for example, or of fewer opportunities. Um, Part of the isolation and the fewer opportunities is actually the fault of, the systems around us. And so I would hope that people picking up this anthology will kind of maybe think a little bit differently about the way that they think about disability, but also maybe it will sort of encourage them to think about it or like have conversations that they wouldn't have before and kind of, you know, do the work to bridge the sort of empathy gap that is asking, do you need accommodations or what can I do to accommodate you, as opposed to the disabled person having to constantly, I don't know, deal with the anxiety of, can I ask for this or am I going to get fired? Or can I ask for this or will someone see me as a burden? Like all that sort of stuff. So thank you again for all of your wonderful, brilliant answers. I really, really appreciate them. Um, I will move on to the next question, which is I'm going to choose one at random, I think. Um, did you feel that writing disability into a fantasy story was difficult in any way, or were there any sort of specific things that posed an obstacle or anything like that when you were crafting your stories?
I think for me, when I've written about celiac specifically, in fantasy settings, is a lot of the barriers, I guess, to writing about it include language, because it's just something like even what's going on is something that people wouldn't necessarily have the vocabulary for or like any sort of frame of reference for. So like that's part of why I chose to set the story in this anthology in a contemporary setting because I wanted to actually be able to use, that specific language. Um, but like if you're putting it into, say, like a secondary world, like which is what I did with my debut novel, like the word celiac doesn't appear in there because it's not something that people would have any sort of frame of reference for. Um, yeah, so I think that's one of the things that I've encountered is just like would people even think about something that's a fairly like not a modern like disability, but something that we've only come to understand recently.
I'm going to jump in because that was definitely something that I dealt with too. I was even like not sure if I should even call it Marfan syndrome, and I ended up just calling it Marfan syndrome, but backwards. Which I'm sitting here now, like I'm like, well, I don't know if I needed to even like do that, but it was one of those, yeah, like especially because like the way that you get tested for Marfan is all genetics and it's all genetic testing. And so it's like, well, I don't like how do you translate that? And so like the nice thing about a short story is I think people are a little more prone to suspend disbelief and just kind of go, okay, these are the rules of the story. Um, and in my brain, I kind of have some thoughts. There's like medical elf doctors, sort of, that I didn't actually really flesh out, but it was cool in a sense because then I could use that to my advantage. And like um, playing with prosthetics in a different way was a very cool thing that I got to play with in my story without saying too much. But yeah.
Speaking of like talking about disability and the language that we use, there's a book called Body Remember. That's someone's firsthand account of what it was like to grow up disabled. And one of the sentences in the intro that stuck with me was, "Everything I write is a translation." And it's like, as a disabled person, we're constantly having to translate what we're going through and what our experiences are for other people. And so that's sort of like what our stories are as well. We're having to translate these experiences and put them into this fantasy setting in a way that people can understand.
I'll chime in as well. I I super agree with the like difficulty of knowing how to like use the language of disability in a setting in which they would have a very different understanding of disability and science and medicine. I kind of approached it as more of a pre-diagnosis sort of situation. I tried to use language that described the symptoms and the like feelings, rather than like outright saying like, oh, this is chronic migraine, this is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, this is chronic fatigue syndrome. Instead of using that, I kind of tried to write about how it felt, because a lot of time in the pre-diagnosis world, all you have is how it feels, and it's feels really nice to have a name and a diagnosis once you get there. But I tried to treat it more as like a like how I felt pre-diagnosis, and because I imagine that's probably how a lot of these chronic illnesses and disabilities felt prior to modern medicine, and or prior to like when everything was just kind of hysteria or whatever, bad blood or and all these sort of different things, and tried to treat it as more of like the experience of being pre-diagnosed and like going through it with that way. I also want to second that it's a little bit easier with short stories, because you can really make sure every scene carries its weight with the disability representation, and versus like with my novels, they all have chronic illness rep, but sometimes it's not as like prevalent in scenes, and so it's like harder to like keep it like meaningfully consistent. And dynamic disabilities exist, and that's a whole other conversation. But I think that was with a short story, I felt it was a little bit easier to keep it consistent with the disability representation and the way it affects my character. But that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think seconding literally everything everyone else has said, one of the things, other specific things that was a little, not like super challenging, but because I was writing like historical fantasy, I had to do a lot of thinking about, well, how, because I didn't want to write like realistic historical fantasy. I didn't want to write a story about like disabled people living in a world that's like challenging for them to live in, or like, not like challenging, but actively hostile to existence. And so like thinking about like realistic ways that disability could be accommodated and supported while also trying to stay within like a historical realism vibe. So it was fun for me, but also hard to like think about like, oh, how would somebody with cerebral palsy like live in a world that is historical fantasy, but also not like like harmful to people with cerebral palsy? How would somebody who has like a congenital amputee, how would they like grow up in a place that like is affirming of their existence as a person, but also isn't like modern? So it was fun to think about how other historical fantasy that exists could have done that, but didn't.
Think this sort of conversation around like what language to use is really, really interesting and relatable to me, because it isn't something that I anticipated would be an issue until I actually started writing. So last year at some point I was doing a writing residency where I was lucky enough to be given a writing mentor and I specifically asked for a writing mentor who was either savvy in sort of disability politics or was disabled themselves. So we would have a sort of common, like vocabulary to draw on, or a common understanding of things, because I would love to write more about disability. And I distinctly remember sending, her name is Kate, sending poor Kate an email mid sort of mental breakdown, being like, am I even allowed to use the word disabled or the word disability in a fantasy book? Like, is that allowed? Or because I think with like a lot of secondary world fantasy, right, they're kind of set in this like fake historical period. And I I think someone mentioned in the comments about, the terminology around disability and chronic illness not exactly aging well. Like a lot of our historical terms are now considered to be quite harmful and problematic. So I obviously didn't want to have a book where I am normalizing the use of that language. But at the same time, I felt like the word disabled or the word disability felt extremely anachronistic, like it was going to pull people out of the story. And then through talking with Kate, I think I ended the email with like, maybe I just need you to tell me that I'm overthinking this and I can do it. And she basically said, you're overthinking this and you can do that, which was like exactly what I needed to hear. But I do think like part of the work that we can all do is sort of try to normalize this newer language, right? Like if we all start using the word celiac and disabled and disability and all that sort of stuff, then eventually, surely the hope is that anyone picking up these books and stories will, read it and not automatically go, oh my God, that language pulled me out of the story. Because the other thing is, I mentioned on the other stream, this concept, I think sort of coined maybe by Elaine Castillo. She wrote a book called How to Read Now that talks about race and what she calls the expected reader. And so the expected reader is someone who fits the dominant hegemonic idea of sort of like a human, so like cis white straight men, or in this case, because women seem to statistically read a lot more. It's like a cis white straight woman is the sort of dominant reader. They are the expected reader, not only for people who are writing, but subconsciously they kind of expect to be catered to in some way, first and foremost. So I think like uh one of my goals personally is to maybe cater a little bit less and start using, all of this terminology to kind of try and maybe normalize it. And then maybe, who knows, maybe 50 years in the future, someone else will be doing a live stream like this and they'll be like, I love that we can just use the word disabled in fantasy. And then I can die happy at the ripe old age of, oh gosh, how old would I be? 77? I don't, that's probably a little bit early to die, but this is a hypothetical. Um, anyway, I could not survive as like a comedian. I'm so sorry. Let's move on to the next question. I think we'll do one more general Q&A and then we'll go on to the sort of more specific discussion about disability and fantasy, which we're already kind of touching on anyway, but um, I would like to ask, what is another genre or subgenre that you would love to write in or see more disabled characters at the forefront of?
I think I don't read a lot of horror because because I'm a wimp, but I know that horror tends to be really awful to disabled people, and it would be really awesome for that to be different, for there to be more like disability affirming, disability written horror novels out there and just like horror content in general. I think it's a fun space and I wish more people played in it for people who actually do engage with horror.
That was exactly what I was thinking too, is that horror is so, I won't say well known, poorly known for using disability in the monster instead of the hero. I'd love to see that switched around.
I'm gonna go the opposite end of the spectrum and say romance. I think pretty often, like when disabled characters appear in like romance storylines, it's often like a tragic ending, like me before you, which I won't talk about it because I hate it so much. Yeah, but I think that I would love to see more of disabled characters like getting their happy ending without having to like change who they are and changing their disability.
I like I would just like to see more in the middle grade and YA space. I'm gonna shamelessly shout out Ash because I'm almost done with a beta read for Ash, and Ash just has this super lovely manuscript she's been working on, and one of the characters featured has POTS, and it was so cool to read that, and just to read it so just naturally flowing into a book for children. And I just wish that um, we had more younger books talking about these issues as well. Like, again, like I was diagnosed when I was 14. Where were those books when I needed them? As opposed to I've got all these super able-bodied characters who are going and doing things. And I'm like, well, that's cool, I guess, for everybody else. Um, and I think we're starting to get more of that, but that's definitely, as a YA author, that's definitely something that I'm working on with my future works and stuff, something that I want to do more. So.
I am one of those people who I don't mind branching out, but I am just a hardcore fantasy reader, and so I don't actually know what the disability landscape looks like in any other genre. But I think I'll also second the YA and middle grade needs more representation. Uh, Phoenix asked if I may, what is POTS? POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Oh, everyone's answering. Cool. Figured I could answer because that's me. uh, I have POTS. Makes my heart rate go zoom and makes me dizzy and tired and ouchy. So the end. But yeah, I think getting representation for younger audiences, especially I would love to see more in big press, like big from big publishing houses and because I think small press, indie, self-pub, we're having such a like feast of diversity in these in what's coming out from indie authors, but it's still just trickling out with traditional publishers. So I think that's not a genre, but I think just in general, getting more traditionally published books that have well written and thoughtful and respectful sense disability rep would be revolutionary.
I feel like the average general consensus is basically more and better disability rep in basically every genre ever. So if anyone is listening, not that I'm very spiritual or anything, but I like to think that we can maybe manifest that in some way. I feel like for me personally, the genre that I'm becoming oddly more and more interested in, despite the fact that I don't actually tend to enjoy reading it, is dystopian. And I think maybe one of the reasons I don't enjoy reading it is because so often it's like what in dystopian like movies and TV shows and such, once you become disabled, I feel like that basically precludes your death, right? Like at some point you are going to be left behind, or you're going to be an acceptable tra or a tragic loss even, or it's like you're holding up the group, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find that that sparks no joy for me because I think what it also does for me is it kind of, yes, disability is a liability, is exactly the feeling. And it kind of, for me, almost reinforces my sort of anxieties around being a burden. And it's like, well, if anything bad happened in the world, then like who would want to care for me? Who would want to make sure that I get to a safe space with everybody else? Like it raises all of these questions that I can't help overthinking. And then I'm like, I just have no interest in this genre. But one thing I would really love to see is dystopian that is focused on disabled characters, because I think some of the things we've seen, like for example, around COVID and masking, right? Like disability advocates and, disabled communities and stuff are very good at the whole mutual aid, community organizing thing, even with the mask blocks and the wildfires happening in the US and stuff. Like we're seeing a lot of the ways that disabled communities doing that mutual aid and that care work is paying off for other people. And so I would really love to see dystopian that kind of goes, hey, disabled people might actually have some sort of maybe like a leg up even in a dystopian setting because they've kind of prepared in some ways for the worst of circumstances. So I would.
I totally agree because that's always so funny to me because it's like people are like, "Oh, I don't know how to survive without this resource," as though people haven't been making it work without medication, without mobility aids, without insulin, without accommodations. Like, we know how to deal with that. We've done that our entire lives. Like, pretty sure I know how I'd survive the apocalypse. I got this.
You know what this makes me think of actually is like this whole idea of I don't know if anyone else is familiar with this, but like the man flu, where it's like whenever a man gets the flu, it's apparently worse, than like women getting the same exact flu. Um, and so one of the things I've observed is that like when my able-bodied friends and family are like in pain or sick, they're like, this is the worst thing ever. I'm gonna die, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, I live in that level of pain and unwellness every day. And this is not a brag. It's just like amazing the sort of difference in life experience and like what I'm able to cope with versus someone else for whom pain and unwellness is incredibly new. So yes, one of who said it in the comments? Harper, of course. Artifice and Access Part 2 Dystopian Boogaloo. Yes. My dream is actually like so I don't know if I know I've mentioned this in some places, but all of the proceeds from Artifice and Access roll into the next project. So I don't know if it will be, as big or like the exact same form as this one. But the next sort of thing I would love to do is do the whole dystopian thing. And hopefully that will be possible by the end of this year. Hopefully, we will see. But moving on, unless anyone else has anything to say, then please jump in. I don't want to steamroll. Um, I'll just pause for a second. Okay, cool. I'll start asking some questions about disability representation in fantasy, which I think we've already sort of started to get into really well. But one of the questions that I'm most excited to ask everyone is, what does a power fantasy look like to you when it comes to disability representation? Do you think so like to contextualize the question, I think for many people, power fantasy can mean different things. So for example, for some people, and it's completely valid, some people might imagine a power fantasy is where their disability is in fact cured. For other people, it might be that it is just totally accommodated. And so they still deal with symptoms, but life is a lot less hard because you have that support. But I'm really curious to know what you guys kind of envision being a really good power fantasy in the fantasy genre.
This one may be kind of strange, but it's just rage. Letting a disabled person be angry. That's it for me.
I think mine might be along the same line is I love I like it when the disabled character and your story does this. I like it when the disabled character is faced with this like horrific challenge and they have this moment of this is no different than what I feel every day. And like with to make her eat with M's story there it's the like there's that moment of like I could resist this Fey food because I resist normal food, or the moment when like someone with chronic pain, and maybe it's a little problematic of like how much we have to like push through in general, but like the moment of someone who who lives with chronic pain experiences some like really bad injury in the story, and it's like, oh no, how will we go on? And but they like their friend is hurt too, and they're like, I'm familiar with pain. I can do this. And like that moment when they like pull themselves back up and like save the day is just so good to me. I love that moment. And it's a little bit of rage, a little bit of just strength in our weakness, and weakness and strength, and I like that moment a lot.
Kara and my partner are likely going to call me out on this. But I just um I just have a soft spot for nobility tropes. I just love a good like princess story. Like I have a whole thing for it, and I just want to see more disabled monarchs. I just want to see disabled people like ruling the world and like because it's just I don't know. We're always seen as this less than, right? Like there's this lower class kind of thing. And even I think a lot of the characters with disabilities already that are in fiction, a lot of them are seen and depicted as lower class. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. Um, and I would just love to see um, one of the very back burner projects in my head has a king user who is a princess queen sort of thing. Um, and I just want more of that. I want Her Royal Highness to wheel herself out in this chair that is just it's this throne that is just absolutely like bedazzled. Like that is what I want, like that's it. That's what I want.
Yeah, I think sort of on the similar lines to what a lot of people have talked about, something that I really like to write, like to see is like sort of this idea of I mean, people do this in a really bad way sometimes, but like disability as like the thing that makes you good at something. So like I think when I was this is going to age me a little bit. When I was in elementary school and reading Percy Jackson for the first time, I remember how like cool it was for like me as a kid with ADHD to read that and be like, "What? ADHD superpower?" Which like maybe that's not the best example of that now that I'm an adult, but just like seeing traits that I've been like marginalized for or told like that's not how you're supposed to do this thing. Like, why are you doing this? Like being like the thing that solves the problem, the thing that's like the powerful thing. And maybe like sometimes people do that in a really gross, weird way, but like seeing that taken and revamped in a way that makes it like affirming and empowering is something that I try and put into my writing and I want to see more of in general.
And I think I'd love to see more like accommodation as a normal thing. Um, like I guess like my fantasy would be to not have to think about it. Like 'cause it's just like dealt with like for instance like at my wedding like all of the food was gluten free and I didn't have to worry about it at all, and that was just so nice because it was one of the few events in my life that I've been to where it wasn't like at least in the back of my mind of either like I'm gonna have to wait to eat until after or I'm gonna have to be super careful about everything. So yeah, it's just one example, but I think it would be amazing to see more of like this is just a normal thing that we plan for.
I love all of that so much. And to kind of continue this line of thinking, so it's not so much a question as like just adding my thoughts. But Tam, what you were saying about sort of like the disability superpower, and for example, how some people kind of write it in a way that's maybe not, actually very inclusive. For example, I think one of the things that was mentioned in the last stream was that. Like this idea of consequences because we got onto the topic of like the magical cure trope, right? For example, so it was like, okay, maybe you are cured of your injury in the moment or your disablement in the moment, or something is given to you so you can perform, well in the moment, but what is the consequence of that? And so I think, in like instances where your disability does grant you or does enable you to sort of do something better than other people, maybe one way to kind of offset the idea that your disability isn't actually disabling is to make it come with some sort of, consequence of some kind. Like, for example, with my autism, it would be great if I could take a magic potion or something and just be really, really good at social stuff for like 3 hours. And then even if it meant when I come home, I'm a total zombie, which to be fair, I like pretty much am anyway. But like if that were the consequence, I think I would gladly take the potion just to sort of have that experience of like, wow, maybe a networking event doesn't have to be physically painful every single time. But I kind of just wanted to put that out there as like a thing that I'm thinking about, because I don't want to disregard or dismiss, the idea of a healing magic or of, like a disability superpower, because I think when it comes to storytelling and creativity, I don't want to like say you can't do any one thing. I definitely think there are ways to make it work. I don't know if anyone else will have any more thoughts on that, but if not, I'm happy to go to the next question. Um, okay, maybe my next question should be, I feel like we've covered most of these, so this is really, really hard because everyone is incredibly smart and clever and had brilliant answers this whole time. I'll ask one of the same questions I asked in the last stream, which is what is sort of like the converse of this, which is what are some tropes or narratives that you would like to see less of in when it comes to disability representation, maybe in general, maybe in fantasy. I'll leave that up to you. And yes, if anyone else in the chat has any questions, please let us know and we'll try and get to them.
I'll go. I mean, obviously, I definitely would like to move away from the happy ever after has to be the disabled person is fixed. I would love to get away from magic as the cure-all. I would love to see more of like magic as a treatment, magic as management. I would love to see more like potions and whatever that can treat symptoms but do have consequences like you were talking about. But I think that moving away from like this hunt for a cure or the only way this can have a happily ever after is if they're fixed by the end because that implies that we need to be fixed or that we shouldn't exist, and I don't like that trope. I also don't love the trope when we are simply there to exist as like motivation for the hero, especially as if when disabled people are just fridged for the narrative, so the hero can have their moment. Um, I would like to move away from that. I don't mind so long as there's like other disabled people. If a disabled person has like dies in the narrative and it's not to motivate someone, that happens, especially if you're like writing a tragedy, but like I don't want him to just die for the sake of motivation or for the shock value or anything like that. So I would love to move away from that one as well.
Um, there's a trope. It's usually applied to women characters and things, but I think it could go well for disabled characters and things as well. And it's called the sexy lamp test. And it's if you replace the character with a sexy lamp, does the story change? And so I'd like it to be the like disabled characters to be integral to the narrative to actually change the events or what's happening and not just sort of be there visible in the background for like diversity points.
Sort of on that same vein, like there is a disabled person, but they're like the gay best friend equivalent in the narrative. They're like the main character's like weird pet that hangs out or whatever. So like more disabled main characters just in general.
Like to get rid of the disabled villain trope, especially where it's like they are the villain because they are disabled. They don't have any other motivation. I noticed this in particular with like all of the James Bond villains being like disfigured or disabled in some way.
I'd really like to also do away with infantilization of people with disabilities. I've read a couple books where uh, the main character was empowered by something their disabled sibling or disabled friend, similar to what um, has been tossed around as disability porn. Um, and I see that happen in books, and I see people that'll praise it for having disability rep, but I'm like, this is no different than when you go, oh, look at this disabled person who did this. And it's like, well, it doesn't sit right to me. You're not praising that person, you're praising the effect that it had on your main character, which thereby is almost stealing this other person's narrative. And it just doesn't sit right with me. And I wish that I haven't seen that in books, but I have.
I would like to add something to the disabled villain conversation because, well, it's like I'm not talking about a disabled villain, but it is like tied with the disability and villainy, right? And I came across this in a book that was published at the end of last year, which kind of shocked me because I thought it's 2024. Like, I guess I just expected things would have like shifted by now. But it's this like event wherein a villain in the story kills a disabled person to show how cruel and villainous they are. Because, we're supposed to feel bad for the disabled person, right? Like it's just a sad, really horrible death. And then obviously that disabled person's death is motivation for the main character because they're like, oh my God, this guy is just so bad. He killed a disabled person. And it's just sort of like, you wrote that? Like, I don't want to say never write that ever, but it's like when you look at, the rest of the story, someone else said this in the comments, is like when that sort of thing happens and then there are zero other disabled characters in the story, that to me feels very uncomfortable to read, unfortunately. So I would like to, and I think it kind of operates similarly to like the sexy lamp, right? Because I do think that if the villain had like smashed a lamp in anger, effectively, like what's happened is we've been intimidated by the villain. Like the disabled character had very little dialogue or impact on the story, beyond that sort of, oh, look how bad he is, effect. I know, justice for lamps, guys. Okay, so Jules in the comments, sorry, in the chat asked a question about, she said, I was wondering how you went about getting your story published. I guess I'm scared of the reaction to having a disabled main character. I will just quickly say that so what happened with this anthology is basically, this happens a lot. So someone will say, hey, I want to put together an anthology, or I'm putting together a magazine, or you might find literary journals or magazines on social media and on their own websites, and they will say, we're doing a themed edition. And so what happens is essentially if you have a story that fits what they are asking for, you can submit it or you can write to theme. It's really up to you. And the process will be very different depending on who is asking for your work. I will Two of the websites that I use for short fiction especially are submittable.com and then also chillsubs.com. So you can go there, type in things like the word count of your story, what genre it is, whether it's like an essay, flash fiction, short fiction, etc. And it will filter all of that for you, and then it will give you a list of places you can submit to. If you're doing novel length works, then I'm afraid I do not have very concrete experience with that, but maybe I don't know if someone else in the one of our contributors wants to chime in with their experiences with short fiction or novel submissions, please jump in.
My debut novel that's coming out the end of this year has a disabled main character. And I will say, I think we touched on it earlier, that especially in like indie presses, there's a lot of diversity that's going on. Um, I never heard anything bad about it. Tenebris is the press I'm working with, and they were all there for all of it. They loved it. They had nothing to say. There wasn't like a bad reaction to it. But I think if you're worried about publishing a story with a disabled main character, that's a sign that you need to publish a story with a disabled main character because there aren't that many of them out there. So it might take a while for it to stick. But if it's a story that you really like and it's a story that you're proud of, just keep going and you will find someone because people want these stories. That's why we're all here in this chat right now.
So my debut that comes out next year, has a chronically ill like POV character. And he was not a POV character the first time I queried it. And the first time I queried it, I got a full request pretty much right off the bat, and then they came back and were like, "Eh, this isn't for me." But then I did a lot of revisions and added him as a POV character on the suggestion of someone else, which really brought his chronic illness that was just this like side thing to the front. And then so this story became had a chronic illness narrative. And when I queried again, suddenly there was not very much interest. And I was a little concerned that it had to do because of the fact that I talked about this POV character's disability in the query, and in the synopsis and stuff. But I ended up signing with a small press, and when we were talking about everything, something that my editor really liked was the disability rep, and I'm now querying the middle grade project that Harper was talking about, and and I've gotten so many responses from agents back that are like, "Oh, this isn't for me, but I love the POTS rep," or like, "I'm really interested in this because of the POTS rep." And I think if there's an agent or editor who doesn't want your book because of the disability rep, you don't want them. I think there's a lot out there that are super excited to see disability rep in fiction, and so I think novel length is just go for it. There will be pushback and there will be hardship, and sometimes you'll wonder if you should just remove that part from your query, but don't. You want to find the people who want to support you and the disability representation that you are representing in your story.
My short 2 cents is be scared and do it anyway. Your future self will thank you. Other people will thank you.
I would just also like to add, I want to second the whole do it scared thing because it is an unfortunate reality. But also, one of the things I wanted to add just quickly was my experience with submitting short pieces. So, in the beginning of 2024, I made the mindful decision to write stories that either focus on disability or depict disability, or at least acknowledge disability in some way. Like all of my work will have that as a thing, bottom line. And since then, I have a very comprehensive spreadsheet that I've been tracking all of my short fiction submissions for the last 3 years. And one of the unfortunate things that I did notice, so I want to like first like sort of jump in and validate you before you even begin. If you are noticing that when you are submitting short fiction stories with disabled main characters and you notice you are getting more rejections than usual, that is a real thing. One of the unfortunate realities is that I looked at my submission statistics for last year and I had my rejection rate was more than double what it had been in the 2 years previous, which I feel like is quite a big jump. And so statistically, I do feel like there is something going on there. But obviously, like rejections are always so subjective and impersonal. It's not like someone is going to reject you and say, I'm rejecting you because I'm ableist and I hate disabled people and you should not be writing this. It will be vibes. But if you ever get that feeling, just know that it is completely valid. But I would also like to encourage you to not give up because I think the more that we try and do this, hopefully the more we can sort of succeed. And then I like to think that, other people who are nervous about writing disabled characters will then see us all sort of doing it and be like, well, maybe I can do it too. I think so. We have technically hit the hour mark, but I just wanted to quickly get to Rachel's question in the chat, if you all don't mind. And Rachel asked, how do you hope Artifice and Access will contribute to conversations on the intersectionality of being disabled and queer/LGBTQIA+? Does someone else want to take that question first?
I think it goes the same kind of as what I said for like the very first question is I kind of just want people to see that queer people exist and chronically ill people exist and chronically ill and queer people exist in the same person, and that we're like we're not weird, like we're normal people, and like within fiction we can exist there as main characters and important side characters and anything else. Like we can be like queer and disabled characters can like should exist, and queer and disabled people do exist, and that we just cover the spectrum of human experience. And I think that like just normalizing that and seeing that like you can be many things and that can be part of who you are, but it's not all of who you are. And I want to see more of that.
I think to kind of jump off that, especially being identifying as ace and disabled myself, I think there's a lot of this this I don't know what the word is. I'm an author. I can't think of words. But this false idea that disability and asexuality go hand in hand. You must be asexual because you're sick, or because you're sick, you must be ace, or not interested, or whatever. And that's not true. My disability has no effect on whether or not I am sexually attracted to someone, and that has nothing to do with any vice versa, any of that. And just kind of debunking this idea that those have to be linked. Um, yeah, that's it.
I think just like sitting here and reflecting on this question, I realized that almost every single person that I'm like good friends with in real life is queer and disabled. So I hope that this anthology and like things going forward will help reflect like the reality that a lot of queer people are also disabled, and like there's a wide variety of disabled people that isn't reflected in literature, like people of color who are disabled, and all of the intersections. So I hope this anthology helps people see that like people in real life can exist in fiction.
Yeah, there's definitely like this trend a lot with disabled characters where they're like these angelic beings who can do no, say no, and be no wrong. Um, and I really like having these queer characters who don't fit into these like rigid boxes that people have carved out for like disabled people in media, where they're just sort of there to be inspiration most of the time. Um, like one of my best friends is disabled and a dominatrix, so it is definitely a thing. And I'd love to see more people like them.
This is making me think of two things. One is that I think a lot of people kind of struggle with the idea that you can be multiply marginalized. So, for example, the idea of being disabled and queer is just something that some people can't comprehend. Alternatively, it's kind of like this of course thing, right? Because being queer is like a problem for some people. And so it kind of gets lumped into this, idea of wrongness. But the other thing that it made me think about is this, like speaking of community and the way that we all connect, right? Like a lot of my friends are, neurodivergent, whether that's ADHD or autistic. And it's because I tend to be drawn to these people. I think you just kind of click with people who are on similar wavelengths to you. But it's also like because we have similar priorities, we have similar accommodations that we need, et cetera, et cetera. I think like making those friendships and connections is a little bit easier maybe than making friends with people who don't share one of the most fundamental parts about yourself. And so I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this because it's a strong feeling in my mind, but I'm not sure how to translate it into words. And this is this sort of idea of like how communities form and like the sort of question of like, well, why is it that the intersection of queerness and disability is such a thing? Like I want people to maybe think critically about that and be like, what is it that, makes this overlap so large? And of course, I'm kind of also thinking about some of the external factors that play into this. So for example, like with the pandemic, for example, so sorry to bring it up again, but it's sort of like queer people and disabled people are among the two groups who are most at risk for further disablement and, getting sick and all of that sort of stuff. So it's like you have this uniting kind of thing that connects us. And so I think one of the conversational pieces that it could be nice that maybe the anthology might raise is like, what is this connective tissue? How, like, it looks very effective. These people are, accommodating each other and falling in love and being best friends and like all of that sort of stuff. So what is different about their relationships that maybe I can bring into my life? I think that would be a really good conversation for people to have. Yes, Harper is doing the hard work and reminding people to hydrate. Thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly scroll to the comments to make sure I haven't missed anyone's questions, but we are officially 11 minutes over the hour. We allocated an hour for this, and I don't want to sort of take over anyone's time that they didn't sign up for. So I don't know, does anyone have any closing comments, or are we sort of all happy to start the goodbye process?
I think I just wanted to say, I've been in a couple other anthologies and none of them have felt like this one. It's just like it's really amazing how everybody is just so excited about it and how everyone is like banding together to do all like the promo posts and the group chat and this and like these Zoom calls. Like I've never seen anything like that and it's super exciting and just really touched to be part of it.
I just want to give, yeah, a huge shout out to Ella because I don't think Ella takes enough credit. Like you literally you sounded the call, the Horn of Gondor, and you got all of us together, and you have done so much. I mean, like y'all, Ella curated this, edited this, got readers to read all of these stories, did this amazing art for the cover, formatted the book, did these bonus cool little art things that are at the top of each chapter that are super cool. She made a map and didn't tell us. She just goes on Twitter one day, she's like, "Look at the map in this book." And I'm like, "What the heck? What do you mean there's a map?" Um, and she's just been absolutely amazing, fearless leader. And I'm so grateful that I get to have my name with yours on my very first publication. I wouldn't have it any other way. Big round of applause for Ella.
You, I am extremely embarrassed. And I would just like to offer one correction. I was not fearless. I was, in fact, full of fear. But again, this is the motto, is like do it scared, right? I am genuinely tearing up right now. But thank you so much. I am again, like I think I've said this like a million times, but I am this anthology obviously wouldn't exist without all of your stories and like all of the support from everyone. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, genuinely, and I hope that we can continue to do this sort of thing, like whether it's like I don't know, publishing stories or jumping on more Zoom calls and lives and just like having these really important conversations. I am so incredibly grateful to everyone. If anyone else wants to say anything for the next couple minutes, I'm going to collect my emotional self and then we can begin the gradual abandonment of the Zoom.
I just also want to say thank you for Ella and for everyone. I know I know anthologies usually are just kind of cool little things to put on your resume and your query letter, and a lot of people kind of don't give them much. They don't really care too much about them as far as like readership is concerned, but just the overwhelming amount of support we have received and the messages I've gotten from early readers. Oh, I might cry. Cried last night after I got a incredibly kind comment on Blue Sky. Someone found me to let them know how much the story meant to them, and I just this anthology is so dear to my heart and feels so special, and I'm just really really honored to be a part of it, and I am so proud of how well it's done already, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
You know, there's that saying that's like queer joy, and this anthology is disabled joy. There is like so much love pouring forth from it. I've been in other anthologies too, and this one's different, like markedly different. Everyone like wants to talk about it. They want to like people are making graphics. That's never happened in anything else I've been in. It's just everyone's so excited about it for very good reason. Um, yeah, it's been incredible.
Okay, thank you so much again, everyone, for tuning in, and thank you to all of our wonderful contributors for having all of the wonderful, clever, meaningful things to say. I, again, don't know how to quite articulate all of my gratitude, but I hope in the future we can kind of do something like this again. Maybe we'll sort of see what happens. And I think so. What we did for the last stream, for anyone who wasn't there, is we all slowly abandoned me. So I sat here and I waved, and everyone hung up. So if you would all like to commence the sad, tragic, horrible abandonment of the Zoom, hopefully we will all see each other again in the future. Thank you so much again. Here is a wonky hand heart. Thank you, and we will see you next time in the magic future. Okay, commencing the waving in a very non-awkward, natural way. Goodbye, good night, good morning, etc., etc. Time is not real. This perfect way to conclude a live stream, I think, actually. I wonder if people will just hang on to the end. How long can we go for?
Like nobody wants to hang out. We just want to stay here forever.
I mean, like, what if they do? Like, what am I have 3 days left of the Zoom business version, so we've got 3 days of this.
We can all just
Never
hang out
ends.
together.
We could.
I guess it might have to be that.
Just keep waving. Wave, smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave.
Oh, this is perfect. Okay, I am going to end this 3 days. Well, we could do 3 days of waving, and then we could be in the Guinness World Book of Records for the longest Zoom wave meeting. And we could add that to the back of the anthology for like a second print run or something.
Yeah, who says
Number
disabled
number
people
one
can't do
Amazon
anything?
number one Amazon new release, holder of longest waving on Zoom.
Exactly. I mean, I think this will skyrocket us to the top of the charts. Like, who can say no to that? They'll be like, what's that about?
I like that this is still being recorded, so this is gonna be someone's gonna just start watching and then they're just gonna be like, this is gone for 4 minutes, guys.
If anyone is watching this in the future, I hope you're sitting here waving as well. For participation, for support, for all of that. Okay. I think I am, however, going to have to force end the call, even though I am so warmed by the support and the commitment to the bit. But thank you. And I'm sure I will be emailing you and messaging you guys later today or tomorrow. But thank you. I love you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.